So it is with great pleasure that we can open this annual symposium with an international guest, Dr. Sasha Roseneil. So Sasha Roseneil is the vice-chancelleur and president of the University of Sussex. Prior to this, she was executive dean of the Faculty of Social and Historical Sciences and pro-provost, equity and inclusion at UCL. Professor Roseneil is known for her research on the changing dynamics of intimacy and sexuality and on feminism, citizenship, and social movements. Originally trained as a sociologist and later as a group analyst and psychotherapist, she has played a leading role in establishing the interdisciplinary fields of gender studies and psychosocial studies in the UK. With colleagues, her most recent book is The Tenacity of the Couple Norm, Intimate Citizenship Regimes in a Changing Europe, that was published in 2020. I want to say that this was a big inspiration for organizing this event, so thank you for writing this book with your colleagues. So today's presentation is The Tenacity of the Couple Norm Towards a Psychosocial Understanding. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Roseneil.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Is the sound okay? Yes, good. And it's okay online for the interpreters? I'm sorry that I have to speak in English. My French is really so bad. You'll be better off hearing me in English and being translated. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a huge pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to revisit a book. This switched on. I don't know. Am I trying to point it to there? Ah, okay. Is it not working? Okay, okay. So this is the book that I'm going to speak from today, The Tenacity of the Couple Norm, and that's a photo of my co-authors who deserve full acknowledgement, Isabel Crowhurst, Turner Hellesunt, Anna Christina Santos, and Maria Stoilova. And that was our, I think that was our last meeting after we'd finished the book and it was all submitted. We were very pleased. The book was the final publication from a big project that actually started a very long time ago, 2007. It was a big European research project called FemCit, and this book came out of one strand of that research, which was the strand that was about intimate citizenship. Now, we had no idea when we started that research that we would end up writing a book about the tenacity of the couple norm, but it became absolutely compelling to us that we did, because it was one of the strongest findings of the research. Looking back on it, in some ways, it's perhaps not totally surprising, because I remember very clearly at the age of about 13, reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time, a brilliant book, beautiful book by Jane Austen, which starts with the following famous sentence: "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Now, I remember at that age, that young age, I got very cross about this. I didn't have the concept of heteronormativity. I certainly didn't have a concept of the couple norm. But I think my early kind of, and these concepts were not available to me, queer feminist self just railed against this idea. But looking back on it, what it was doing was it was speaking about the tenacity of the couple norm. I think that probably there was something seeded there for me. I actually went on to write my next essay in that class on Oscar Wilde, who was jailed for 3 years hard labour for homosexuality in 1895. And that was kind of my rebellion against this at that age. But I did instinctively kind of dislike this starting point, although I love the book. And I think that gets to some of the contradictions, actually, that there are in the couple norm. We can love a book that is a story about a relationship and its troubles and travails, and problems, and be really caught up in the kind of love and the romance at the same time as having some distaste, discomfort about it. So this book, The Tenacity of the Couple Norm, argues that the couple norm is a powerful and ubiquitous psychosocial force, so at once both social and psychological, that maintains that being in a couple is the normal, natural and best way of living. And that the couple norm shapes culture, institutions, relationships, desires and imaginations to propel us towards and keep us within, or if not within, then fundamentally orientated towards the couple form. The tenacity of the couple norm explores the ongoing strength and the grip that the couple norm has on our lives. It argues that the couple norm is one of the most potent objects of normativity in contemporary European societies, and it shows how the tenacity of the couple norm comes sharply into focus against the backdrop of very significant changes in the ways that we live our lives, with the ways we live our intimate lives. In the sense it is revealed to us much more clearly in current intimate citizenship regimes. Now, as I said, when we started the project, we didn't expect to write a book about the couple norm. That wasn't our area of focus at all. We started with a focus on intimate citizenship, which was one of 6 dimensions of citizenship that the big project was looking at. We were interested in understanding the impact that women's movements, but also in our project, lesbian and gay movements, were having on citizenship, in this case on intimate citizenship in Europe. The question we were seeking to answer, have I gone too far? Yes, was how have women's movements and lesbian and gay movements impacted intimate citizenship in Europe over the last 40 years? What's been the impact of social movements effectively on intimate citizenship? And we used a most different comparative methodology. We were looking at 4 different countries in Europe, in a sense the 4 corners of Europe. Bulgaria, a post-communist, post-totalitarian state in the southeast corner of Europe. Norway, a social democratic, woman-friendly welfare state, it was often described as. Portugal, a southern European Catholic post-dictatorship state. And the United Kingdom, a northwestern European liberal or perhaps neoliberal welfare state. So four different types of welfare regimes, different political histories, different histories of social movements as well. We did 3 strands of research across the 4 countries. There was a historical study of the claims and demands of the social movements. We wanted to see what the movements had actually been asking for, what they'd been saying, over a period of about 40 years, 1968 to 2008. We also carried out a critical analysis of law and policy in relation to intimate life across the 4 countries in order to see how law and policy had changed during that period. And then we also did a biographical narrative study of the everyday experiences of intimate life of people living outside conventional couples and families. So those are the areas of law and policy that we looked at. I won't read them out, but a whole range of different areas of policy in relation to intimacy and family life. And then particularly important for this book, we carried out interviews, 67 in-depth interviews, and they were really long interviews, biographical narrative interviews, with people living in the capital cities of each of the 4 countries, people aged between 30 and 55, so people at the age at which you might most expect them to be living kind of conventional coupled family lives. But the people we interviewed were living aslant to that, so they were either single or they were in a non-cohabiting, living apart together relationship, or they were lesbian, gay, in a same-sex relationship, or they were living in shared housing, or more than one of those. Some of them were more than one of those. And they were both from the majority ethnic group in each country, but also from a number of minoritized or racialized groups. So in Bulgaria, we interviewed people from the Roma minority and from the Turkish minority. In Portugal, from the Roma minority and Cape Verdeans, in the UK, Pakistani minority and Turkish minority, and in Norway, Pakistani minority and Sami minority. So a range of different minoritized groups, because we were interested also in how changes in intimate life were playing out for different minoritized groups. So what did we find? Well, I mean, to summarize it, we found that there's been radical transformation in what we were calling intimate citizenship regimes over the 4 decades in all 4 countries, albeit at a different pace and to a different extent. But despite very different political histories, there's been a movement away from repressive laws and illiberal policies governing personal life. That's a sort of macro level change. We identify a number of processes of change that are contributing to that. Broadly similar processes across the countries, processes of individualization, the increasing expectation that people will make decisions about their own lives as self-determining individuals, sort of detaching them from family and often becoming geographically mobile. Processes of depatriarchalization or equalization between men and women, particularly related to women's increasing social and economic independence. Defamilialization, so the extended family receding from daily life and the nuclear family losing its grip on individuals. The liberalization of law and policy in relation to intimate life. So, for instance, divorce laws changed a lot during this period. The laws regulating same-sex sexuality changed as well. And the pluralization of ways of living intimate life. So more and more people living together unmarried, more and more people living alone, single parenting, births outside marriage. These processes of pluralization, of diversification happened across all 4 countries. And also a process that we call homotolerance, or maybe homonormalization. So same-sex sexuality, same-sex relationships became increasingly tolerated and to some extent accepted as normal. Again, different in different countries, less so in Bulgaria than the other countries. But those were the broad processes of transformation in the intimate citizenship regimes that we found. But amidst these changes, it was very clear that the committed cohabiting couple form continues to be the structure of domestic life and of caregiving that is assumed, promoted, reproduced, expected, and even injuncted by governments, by welfare states, by law, by policy, by popular culture, and by communities. And as the legal sanctions for breaches of the couple norm have diminished in force and range, they've tended to be replaced by informal social sanctions and processes of positive reinforcement. So in contemporary intimate citizenship regimes, the couple norm is above all enacted within relationships between people who matter to each other. So in primary reference groups, in families, in friendship groups, and in communities of ethnic and local belonging. So sometimes explicitly articulated, but often not, the couple norm shapes people's intimate life choices, their subjectivities, and their intimate imaginaries in a wide range of ways. We found that our interviewees, and we didn't ask them about the couple norm at all, it wasn't a concept we were using, it came out of the research, but we just asked them to tell us the story of their intimate life, their personal life. Start wherever you want. And they then told us their life stories. And we just asked them more to tell us more about the things they talked about. So the word couple norm wasn't in our minds at this point. But what we found is that the couple norm is variously embraced and celebrated. It's complied with and survived, challenged and evaded, resisted and rejected, struggled with and worked around, as people seek to reconcile their intimate desires with what feels right and what is socially acceptable. So operating differently across the different national contexts where we studied and between the different social groups, and operating differently at different points in people's lives, and always in relation to every individual's own singular biography, the couple norm, we found, remains remarkably consistent in its centrality to the stories that people told us about their lives. So the book focuses on the couple norm, and how it's lived and experienced by individuals, how it's changed over time, and how it varies between places and social groups. And we developed the idea of intimate citizenship regimes as a kind of bigger way of trying to understand the changes that we were looking at. So the book makes an argument about intimate citizenship regimes, by which we mean the legal, policy and cultural frameworks and the everyday practices that give shape to intimate life, determining which forms of intimate life are recognised and included by society, by the legal systems, and which are misrecognised and marginalised and excluded. And so the book sets out an argument that intimate citizenship regimes are normative systems. They're sets of rules that are norms and sets of practices in relation to intimate life that operate largely through normative power. So through consent, really, through popular consent, or what Gramsci called hegemony, shaping our intimate lives, our desires, our innermost feelings, our expectations about what matters, rather than primarily operating through force. So it's not that people are directly instructed to obey the couple norm. It's a more subtle process, normative process than that. Intimate citizenship regimes develop over time in relation to existing law and policy, and they exhibit what political scientists call path dependency. So, what comes next is it follows from what's happened before. And the book argues that intimate citizenship regimes are always changing. They're always in motion. I love the notion of famille en mouvance. It really resonates with me because everything, as a sociologist, I see the world as constantly in movement, in change. I mean, also always been interested in social movements, but the idea of movement, I think, is so fundamental to understanding social change. But intimate citizenship regimes are always changing. They respond to social movements, they respond to civil society activism, to political actors, to government intervention, to politicians, but also to cultural change and to the sort of changes in ways people are actually living their everyday lives. So the book offers an analysis of 4 intimate citizenship regimes of each of the countries through the lens particularly of the couple norm, and it explores how the couple norm is institutionalized and supported and mandated by legal regulations and by social policies, but particularly, and this is through 16 case studies in the book, how it's lived by ordinary people in their everyday lives, and particularly here, how it's lived by people who are actually living at an angle, at a slant to the couple norm. They are people who are not fully living according to the norm. And so the book is a kind of set of case studies as well, and sort of explications of the lived experience of the couple norm. And then finally, there's a part of the book that is really about trying to theorize all of this. It takes the analysis and the stories, the lives of the people that we interview, both the 16 case studies, but the bigger set of data, and develops a theorization of the couple norm, of how it operates upon us and within us, through us, and of why it is so tenacious. And it's what I would call a psychosocial analysis, because it's about linking the biographical and the societal, the individual and the collective, the personal and the political, inner and outer worlds. So we argue that the potency of the couple norm lies particularly in its entanglement with other norms and its capaciousness, how kind of all-encompassing it is, how big it is. So first of all, we identified, as we were analysing our data, 4 norms. We've only written a book about one of them. There are probably 3 other books to be written from our data, but I don't think we'll ever get round to writing them. But our data spoke to us of 4 norms of intimate citizenship. The gender norm of differentiation, of complementarity, of hierarchy between men and women, the sort of gender binary, the gender norm, that there are differences, fundamental differences between men and women. The heteronorm has been quite widely written about by now. The procreative norm and the couple norm. And this book really does focus primarily on the couple norm. But it also argues that whilst these 4 norms are analytically distinguishable, they are actually entangled in each other, with each other, in everyday life and in how they operate. So the gender norm of differentiation, of complementarity and hierarchy between men and women suffuses the heteronorm, and the couple norm is suffused with expectations of heterosexuality and procreation. So actually they are all part of the kind of complex intimate citizenship regime that operates. But together, overlaid, interwoven, they form the tapestry of our intimate imaginaries, of our intimate subjectivities. So we argue intimate citizenship norms operate politically through state power, through legal prohibition and regulation, and through social and public policy. They operate socially through clusters of injunctions and expectations in social life, in social institutions, in everyday practices, in relationships between family, between friends, neighbours, colleagues, wider communal relations. And they operate through culture, through cultural expectations and representation. So, go back to Pride and Prejudice, but any number of, all the time, culture reproduces the couple norm. The idea of what is right, good, desirable in intimate life is framed through the couple in popular culture, in film, in fiction, magazines. So intimate citizenship regimes, all these four intimate citizenship norms get inside us. They shape our subjectivity, they shape our sense of self. And from our interviews, we identified six constitutive expectation injunctions that are part of the couple norm, that we could break the couple norm down into these six different expectation injunctions. And just to say something very briefly of them, there is the expectation or injunction of family approval, that the couple is a matter of concern for the wider family. Now, we were quite surprised by how much this played out. I think we expected this to be the case in some of the ethnic groups that we interviewed, but actually we were very struck by how in the majority groups that we interviewed, the people from majority backgrounds, they were also very, very concerned about what their families thought, and their families were very concerned about them coupling, settling down, being settled, forming a couple, not always getting married, but forming a couple as being a really important part of what they expect. And our interviewees wanted their family's approval. And when they weren't in a couple, they felt the lack of their family's approval. So this was something that really stretched across our interviews in a way that did actually surprise us quite a lot. And it really challenges the dichotomy between autonomous and arranged mate selection systems that I think that is quite a strong idea. Actually, this ideal of family approval operated across our interviewees. There's also the expectation of homogamy, of the couple being similar to each other, particularly in terms of social class, of background, but also of religion and ethnicity and of age. And many of our interviewees talked about the difficulties they experienced being in a couple where there was significant difference between the two of them, the two parties. Not so much in how they navigated it, but sometimes, but in how other people saw the relationship. And these differences of ethnicity, of religion, of age, but also of class, really played out in important ways in their stories. The difficulties of mixed relationships. There was very much also the expectation, injunction of marriage or of lifelong commitment, perhaps less so in some areas of marriage, but of committing to someone for life. And therefore, we were also very struck by just how distressed our interviewees were about the breakdown of their relationships, divorce, and how much, despite in many ways the law not forcing people to stay married and culture actually being much more accepting of it, people feeling a deep sense of failure at their relationships ending because they had wanted a lifelong couple form. The expectation, the injunction that the relationship should be rooted in romantic love was also a very powerful one, and of suspicion of relationships that were seen as not being. So for those who entered arranged marriages, how they were looked at by other people, but also of when romantic love dies within a relationship. You know, does the couple continue? And people sense that their relationship was no longer authentic if there was not that sense of romance anymore. Similarly with sex, that the couple is founded on sex, and if sex disappears from a relationship, becomes problematic, that calls the couple into question. But also the idea that the sex should just be within the couple. So the whole question of monogamy and polyamory, and the expectation that both the couple is founded on sex, but that sex stays within that couple. That was a very powerful part of the stories that we were told, and the problems that that caused to people. You know, what do you do if sex goes from your relationship? Do you leave it? But also, what about affairs, and when one party has a relationship? But also the small number of people we interviewed who were in consciously non-monogamous, polyamorous relationships, how they navigated those, and how that became a very big part of their story, and how difficult it was actually to talk about that with friends, colleagues, family. It was something that they could talk about with us as the interviewer, but actually they were very reticent about sharing it more widely. And then finally, the idea that the couple is the place of dedicated work. And this is, I think, a newer narrative, but actually, you know, you need to work at it, was a very strong narrative, particularly in Norway and the UK, that you kind of go to therapy, you go to couple counselling, you read about how to keep yourself in your relationship, and that it needs work. You can't just expect it to survive without dedicated work. And we saw that as a rather newer narrative, a rather newer element of the couple norm, but one that was taking quite a strong hold in our interviewees. So anyway, the book tries to pare out the couple norm into these constituent parts that we found in our interviews. These aspects, these constituent injunctions and expectations, we don't find them all in everyone's story. So this is an analysis of the whole data set. And in people's stories, they vary from a kind of lighter pressure expectation to conform to a much more compelling demand, an injunction to conform. And they vary between different groups, different social groups too, and they vary somewhat between different countries. So the norm of dedicated work was much less obvious in Bulgaria, for instance, than it was in Norway, which is a much more individualized society. And sometimes people were very conscious of these aspects in telling their stories, and they would talk explicitly, reflexively about this. And sometimes they weren't. We pulled these out of their stories. We were identifying these aspects. In the stories that people told us about their intimate lives, and just answering this question, tell me the story of your personal life, start wherever you want. Much of the time, they were embracing the couple norm as we saw it in our analysis, even though our interviewees were actually not living conventionally coupled lives. You know, they were single, they might have been lesbian or gay, but they're not heterosexually coupled. They might be in a living apart relationship. So again, in a couple, but not a conventional couple, they might be living in shared housing. But the couple norm ran through their stories, and for much of their stories, they positively embraced this idea of the couple. They might positively endorse some aspects, but often not thinking about the choices that they were making in relation to it. Sometimes, though, they were quite self-reflexively aware. So we had some who were very consciously thinking about this, often calling themselves feminists or saying that they had a kind of, but we didn't deliberately go out to interview anyone who was identified as a feminist. So the stories people told us were about pursuing partners. You know, this was a big part of their stories, looking for someone to settle down with, often someone who was culturally like them, someone suitable, someone who was socially acceptable. They didn't always say it quite like that, but they very strongly believed in romantic love and in the importance of romantic love as a foundation of a strong relationship. They talked about falling in love. The narrative of falling in love was very present amongst our interviewees, but also about seeking family approval for their intimate life choices. Longing, in many cases, to get married, to make a public statement, a legal commitment to their partner, with the intention of staying together for the rest of their lives. And this was also strong amongst lesbians and gay men who we interviewed, whether or not they were able to do it. So in Bulgaria, they weren't able to do it. In the other three countries, they were. But it was quite a widespread desire. They also wanted to have sex with their partners, and when they didn't manage to have it, they talked about it less when it wasn't a problem, but it often was part of the narrative of why a relationship broke down, of not desiring sex with their partner being a problem, their problem, or their partner's problem if their partner was stopping, and the problem of when interest was directed elsewhere, of how adultery or non-monogamy was causing problems, and then also how they needed to work on it to try and help the relationship survive. So in many ways, the stories people were telling us were stories of these 6 expectations and injunctions. People also experienced these expectations and injunctions sometimes as coming from outside. So sometimes it wasn't a sort of sense of these expectations being placed upon them, but sometimes they did feel like they were coming at them. And they could be aware of the pressures on them and critical of the pressures they were experiencing. So sometimes they talked about feeling directed or pushed, nagged, cajoled by families, sometimes particularly by their mothers, in the direction of couple normative behaviours. And they sometimes talked about being criticised or socially marginalised or stigmatised for not living according to the expectations on them. And sometimes, as I said, there was a political critique, a sort of feminist critique or a social movement type critique of this. So sometimes amongst our interviewees, the couple norm and its expectations and injunctions were questioned, were evaded, even resisted and rejected. And what you might call counter-normative agency sort of rose up to challenge the norm. But the core of the couple norm, the construction of coupledom as the normal, natural, superior way of being an adult, the best way of living one's life, was experienced often in the tension between internal and external, a sort of sense of kind of felt, experienced naturalness of the need to couple, and sometimes also of the external pressures, the social and the psychological being kind of quite fundamentally wrapped up together. So the felt need to be part of a couple was strong, the yearning, feeling organic, natural, coming from inside, and often more real than the external pressures, more real than any political pressure or political critique. So sometimes people would say, I know I shouldn't feel like this. I'm an independent woman, I'm a feminist, but I feel desperate to find a partner. So that kind of tension was spoken about. And failure to live up to the couple norm could often lead to feelings of real shame and despair. So the book, and I don't have time to say very much more, but the book tries to explore this in the final parts using a psychoanalytic lens and particularly, and I encourage you to read the book. The book is available free. It's open access, so you'd have to buy it. You can download it from UCL Press. But if you're interested in following some of the psychoanalytic lines of thinking that we develop in the book, we talk about the power of belief, the power of unconscious belief, or what Lynn Layton calls the normative unconscious, how normativity operates in unconscious ways through us. We also talk about the power of resistance, which was very much also in evidence in our narratives, the narratives of people, drawing on Judith Butler's kind of notion that norms do not always exercise a final or fatalistic control. They're there, they're powerful, but actually the psyche resists them. There is a kind of inherent resistance to, an unruliness to the psyche that resists normativity. Lynn Layton says something similar. She says, what is split off from consciousness does not disappear, but rather continues to haunt the psyche. And we use that to talk about the desires, the attractiveness of a life outside the couple. So the attractiveness of a kind of life free of another, of being able to follow your desires, and that gets split off, especially when one is coupled. But actually that power, that resistance kind of comes up and disturbs the couple and can really powerfully destabilize. And it's part of why couples break down, is that there is something actually alluring about life outside the couple, about the freedom, the autonomy, And then we also talk about the tension between relationality and autonomy. The power that relationality has, both the relationality that is exemplified in being part of a couple, but also the relationality that is about conforming to social norms. That you are more connected to your family if you're doing what they want. That is a sort of, if you're fulfilling their desires for you, then you're also you're being able to live a more relationally fulfilled life. But there is constantly a tension between relationality and autonomy in our subjectivities. And this is at the heart of people's relationships to the couple. So I refer to work that I've done on relationality, but also to the work of others about the power of the desire to be autonomous, to live an autonomous life. And then finally, we use the work of a number of psychoanalysts to explore something that's perhaps a bit harder to grasp, and that is the intense desire for the closeness to one other person. And this is something that I think perhaps sociology is not quite so able to talk about, because there is, I think, something still that eludes us when we try to just develop sociological or even just normative explanations of the couple norm. And so Otto Kernberg, I think, grasps this somewhat in talking about the lifelong yearning for physical closeness and stimulation, for the intermingling of body surfaces that is linked to the longing for symbiotic fusion with the parental object, and by the same token to the earliest forms of identification. Adam Phillips, who's written a very compelling book about monogamy, he's a Lacanian psychoanalyst, he says, if you start life as part of someone else's body, your independence is a dismemberment. Being a couple reminds us, persuades us again, that we are always someone else, a piece of them. And there's another, I don't quote her here, but I do in the book, another feminist psychoanalyst, Bracha Lichtenberg Ettinger, who talks about what she calls matrixial subjectivity. She talks about how we're all formed, we all grow out of the body of a woman. We grow out of some other body, and there is something really fundamental in subjectivity about closeness and intimacy with another. Now, that might be a bit too spiritual or cosmic for some people, but I think it does actually offer us another lens for thinking about the tenacity of the couple norm. There are norms, there are powerful social norms, there are intimate citizenship regimes, there's law, there's policy, there's the pressure of society. But perhaps there's also something fundamental about being a human being that is born out of gestation in another person's body that leads to an intense desire for closeness to another's body. But you may or may not find that too difficult to deal with. I think it's really interesting. It's been very challenging, certainly to my research group, in us talking about these issues. But that's what I mean by psychosocial analysis. It's about trying to look at the macro structures, the processes of social change, the intimate citizenship regimes of law, policy, the social relationships and practices of intimate life, people's stories about those, which manifest the pressures and the challenges of the couple norm, but also then trying to sort of delve into some of the more conflicted aspects that explain why this couple norm is so tenacious, even when there are so many reasons why it shouldn't hold us anymore. I will just finish finally with the words of Lauren Ballant, who was a dear friend of mine, who sadly died a number of years ago, but whose work I think has been a great inspiration for me in talking about the cruel optimism of the couple norm. I can't read it out. No, I haven't. Yes, I have got it here. I can read it out to you just to finish. She wrote back in 2012 a book called Cruel Optimism, which she said is a relation of cruel optimism is a double bind in which your attachment to an object sustains you in life at the same time as that object is actually a threat to your flourishing. So you can't say that there are objects that have the quality of cruelty or not cruelty. It's how you have the relationship to them. Like it might be that being in a couple is not a relationship of cruel optimism for you, because being in a couple actually makes you feel like you have a grounding in the world. Whereas for other people, being in a couple might be, on the one hand, a relief from loneliness, and on the other hand, the overpresence of one person who has to bear the burden of satisfying all your needs. So it's not the object that's the problem, but how we learn to be in relation. So I just want to end by saying the couple is not the problem here. It's the normativity of the couple, but it's also the inherent conflicts there are in being attached to one other person. It's how we relate to the couple form. I'll finish there.